What's up, everybody? Dr. Zeke, your pharmacist and adult sleep coach. Today, I'm going to bring you a topic that hits a lot of the women that I work with. This is called estrogen dominance. Now, we're going to touch on that, but we're really going to just show how stimulatory the estrogen can be in your system, if that's a word, and then also what can cause more estrogen receptors to be stimulated that's in our environment, which can also cause a slew of symptoms that can interfere with your sleep. Like always, this is educational purposes, but if you like this video, please like, share, subscribe, send it to a friend. This really helps, gives me more feedback on whether or not these videos are helping you so I can continue making more. But without further ado, let's talk about estrogen dominance. Now, today we're going to cover the causes of estrogen dominance, really how we can just expel and excel this estrogen in our bloodstream, and why we don't want that double-edged sword feeling, meaning if we have too little, there's a problem. If we have too much, there's a problem. But we want this thing to be balanced, right? And then that also is going to take us into detoxing, what we should be doing to safely getting rid of estrogen in our body. Then talk about xenoestrogens, the synthetic estrogens in our environment that can stimulate these receptors and increase our risk for things like cancer down the road. And then, of course, as always, what are some lifestyle recommendations that can help move estrogen along safely and lower it if needed. So just like we mentioned, estrogen is that pink line that's going up after your period. So day 5 from day 14, you get the peak, which is around ovulation. And most women will figure out by that time, it is hard to calm down. It is hard to rest because their mind might be going. They might have a lot of energy, might have a lot of mood. Their sex drive has increased. And so falling asleep might be a task. Also, staying asleep might be a task, or waking up early might be an issue. And it's just good to overall just bring awareness to this to a lot of women that I work with, because they thought something was wrong. But instead, this is what happens in your monthly cycle, because estrogen, as we know it, has many jobs in the body. Let's check that out. Now, brain and nervous system, we know it helps to maintain memory, mood, concentration, even reasoning ability. Now, this is important because this is long-term effects of estrogen and why you want to make sure you're monitoring these levels as you age. Now, when we look in the cardiovascular system, it helps literally to reduce heart disease and artery disease. So looking at estrogen long-term, we are going to need estrogen long-term. Now, metabolic and general health, it's going to enhance our energy. It helps us with our magnesium. It helps with bone loss. It increases blood flow. It helps the collagen in our skin so we look nice and young. And it also regulates our body temperature. But estrogen overall is a very stimulatory hormone. It actually reacts with the glutamate in our brain receptors, so we're always constantly there. So one thing that we have to know is, we want estrogen to be there, but like I said, not in high amounts. Now, did you know there are 3 forms of estrogen that you can check in labs? Here they are. You have estrone, which is E1. This is mainly produced after menopause, so your body produces this from your fat cells. But it's a reserve source of estrogen. Now, with this, it can stimulate breast and uterine tissues, which increases the risk of cancer. The next thing is estradiol. That's E2. This is the dominant estrogen before menopause. So it's being produced by the ovaries. Now, this is 12 times more potent than E1 and 80 times more potent than E3. But this helps to support bones, brain, your heart, your mood. But excessive levels have been shown to increase breast and uterine cancer risk. Now, these are all associative, so there's not anything like random control trials saying, I gave this person a lot of E2 and we saw cancer risk. That would just be very inhumane. We just know this as an associative risk. So it says we've seen the data that anybody with this high, we see this types of cancer, right? Now, when we look at estriol, E3, it is a weaker form of estrogen, but there is a lower risk as it relates to stimulating the breast tissue. Now, this binds mainly to what we consider the beta receptor, which gives us protective barriers when it comes to the estrogen receptors. So when we see this in compounding, you'll notice a majority of the prescription is going to be E3, like 80%, they'll start there. And then E2 will be 20% because we don't want too much of that stimulatory version of estrogen, especially after menopause. Now, one thing that's important about these types of estrogen is proper detoxification. And I can honestly do a whole video covering how estrogen has to be detoxed. Now, when we look at that, there are 4 main ways estrogen gets out of the body. The first one is our liver. Our liver does the majority of the work. Everything you consume goes right towards the liver, and therefore your liver is oftentimes the first thing to really impact anything that it's consuming. Now, once that happens, it processes this in a nice package and it pushes it into the intestines or the bile so it can be excreted out as stool or poop. Then lastly, you have the kidneys, which it makes things water soluble so you can pee it out in that way. And then lastly, to kind of take off more stress and workload of your kidneys and your liver, you might have been recommended to sweat. This helps to get rid of a lot of heavy metals, a lot of toxins, but it can also get rid of a lot of minerals and nutrients that we have in our body that we need for function. Now, this is what happens with detox. Estrogen is basically your hormone. It goes through a phase 1, which I put here as intermediates. Now, that intermediate step can be good because it goes right into a methylation process and it gets kicked out, or it gets put to 2 different metabolites. Estrogen can be converted into 2 different metabolites, one that can damage DNA, one that can stimulate your estrogen receptors some more. That's not what we want. We want it to get methylated and then kicked out. So therefore, when everything goes as planned, you have methylation, and there's a word here called glucuronidation, and that packages everything up so you can eliminate it either through your kidneys or through the stool. Most of the time, everything goes through the stool. That is why pooping and making sure your stool is nice and formed is a good thing and a healthy thing when it comes to hormones. Now, what are some causes of elevated estrogen? Now, we just talked about pooping. So a diet low in grains and fiber can really affect the way that your estrogen gets reabsorbed into the bloodstream. So you want to have this fiber packaging things nice and good so you can store your hormones into it and get rid of it in the toilet. So a diet low in fibers, environmental estrogens, we'll touch on those. Excessive doses of estrogen replacement. If your doctor checked your estrogen level, but they didn't check how your body metabolizes estrogen down the road, a lot of times you can get doses higher than what you need, and your body's not kicking this out, and therefore estrogen seems to build up. So you want to be careful. Now, there are foods that can increase your estrogen level. That's something that you can easily Google. Foods that increase estrogen levels in the body. The next thing is an impaired elimination of estrogen, either through the liver or the GI tract. Sometimes when you have some form of like gut disorder or constipation or diarrhea, a lot of these things can affect the way estrogen gets reabsorbed. And then one of the things we see is lack of exercise. Now, here are some of the symptoms, and as we can tell, my whole point is poor sleep. But one thing that we do when we start to notice better management of things like elimination, improving your poop, is that not only does your sleep improve, but some of your daytime symptoms like anxiety and agitation, and maybe you are more interested in sex, and maybe the fibrocystic disease, those little lumps in your breast start to soften a little bit or get smaller. So these are some things that you can notice with proper estrogen management. Now, these are xenoestrogens. These are environmental synthetic forms of estrogen that stimulate. And as you've been told, BPA is one of the most potent forms of estrogen when it comes to your body. So you have to be very careful about plasticware, anything that says BPA, because it is not your friend. Phthalates are often paired with anything with fragrances. Parabens are in topical formulations, so look at that label. Pesticides and herbicides are in things in the dirty dozen when it comes to produce. So look at EWG dirty dozen to see which ones are the worst when it comes to pesticides and herbicides. Industrial chemicals, pharmaceuticals, personal care, household products, anything with the fragrance. Start to slowly get rid of it. And then, of course, there's foods that are natural xenoestrogens. So if you're someone that has a high diet in soy, flax, those can oftentimes carry that risk. Now, there's 3 ways we can check. There's a Dutch test, which looks at those metabolites of estrogen and making sure that you're kicking these things out. We can do it through the serum, which gives us kind of a general estimate on how much of that hormone you have in your body. And you can also do free levels, which is the active form of hormones. And then the GI map, which is really looking at the poo. Are you able to get rid of this stuff, or are things going on in the body which is causing a reabsorption? It's causing constipation and diarrhea. GI map and targeting the GI tract and the microbiome, those bacteria, viruses, and all those things living inside you could be just beneficial holistically in whole, not just your hormones. So a lot of doctors that are in that functional medicine realm will always run something related to your poo. So that's just overall where the health they believe begins. And I think it really does help. Now, what are some ways naturally to lower excess estrogen in the body? Now, we talked about how low exercise can help improve. Exercise allows our GI tract to move, so it can help with constipation. It can help with so many other things. So if you are not exercising, you can really help lose weight, because if you are overweight, just remember E1 is what's being produced by the fat cells, and that has those stimulatory properties to breast and uterine cancer just to begin with. Now, you can also eat foods that decrease estrogen levels. We're going to go over that in the next slide. Improve the health of your GI tract. You can improve phase 1 and phase 2 detox in the liver. And like I said, we can do so many videos just on itself on estrogen detox, what tests we can run. So if you are interested in that, let me know in the comment section. And then, of course, making sure you're on the right dose of estrogen replacement. Now, what are those foods? Think cruciferous vegetables. You can Google that. Those are things like broccoli. Those are things like Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, as well as kale. A lot of those help supply your body with nutrients so you can safely package estrogen and get it out of the system so you don't have those elevated amounts. The other things, collard greens, bok choy, and of course, mushrooms. Mushrooms are not just good in vitamin D supplementation, but it helps with just helping to kick out your hormones so you don't have an abundance. And then there's, of course, other things like fruits, seeds, and nuts, and other things that you can read there. Now, if you like this series, please stay tuned until the next one where we are going to talk about low progesterone. And if you're thinking, well, that's probably not me, think again. Because normally people getting off of long-term birth control or individuals that are very stressed and always dealing with some other issues, or if you have a exposure to a lot of environmental toxins, or you have some health conditions, a lot of times your progesterone is the one that gets hit. And what happens when you have low progesterone after ovulation? Well, now you don't have that calming effect, and it's harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. So what we're going to talk about is low progesterone and I can't sleep. We'll go over that, what progesterone does, what are some causes, and of course, what are the lifestyle things we can do to help increase progesterone and also balance it with estrogen. So if you like this, remember, like, subscribe, and leave me comments down below. Anything I can do to make these better, more informational for you. Y'all take care. Dr. Zeke, have a good one.